The scream of the wind across the Dakota prairie could strip the flesh from bones, and Margaret Whitmore was certain she would die out here in the frozen wasteland. Her husband's body already stiff beneath the canvas tarp beside her wagon. The February cold of 1879 had come down like God's own judgment, and she had no way to fight it anymore. She sat huddled under every blanket she owned, her lips blue, her fingers past the point of pain and into numbness. The horses had broken free during the blizzard 2 days ago, taking with them any hope of reaching Grass Valley, South Dakota. Thomas had tried to catch them, had run out into that white hell, and his heart had simply given out. She had dragged his body back herself, tears freezing on her cheeks, knowing that she would soon follow him into death. The wind howled again, shaking the wagon so hard she thought it might tip over. Margaret closed her eyes and thought of their little farm back in Pennsylvania, the one they had sold everything to leave behind. Thomas had promised her a new life out west, promised her they would build something better. Now he was gone, and she was going to freeze to death alone on this God-forsaken trail, and no one would even know what had become of them until spring thaw revealed their bones. She was nearly unconscious when she heard it. The sound of hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, cutting through the wind. At first she thought it was a dream or perhaps death itself coming to claim her. But the sound grew louder, and then there were voices, deep and commanding, shouting orders. There, wagon ahead, someone might still be alive. Margaret tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. She heard boots crunching in the snow, coming closer, and then the canvas flap at the back of the wagon was pulled aside. A gust of wind and snow blew in, and with it came a man's face, weathered and strong, with dark eyes that widened when he saw her. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice was rough but urgent, filled with concern. She tried to nod, tried to speak, but nothing would come. Her body was shutting down, the cold having taken too much already. The man turned his head and shouted, "She's alive, but barely. Get that fire going now and bring every blanket we have." More voices, more movement. Margaret felt herself being lifted, strong arms pulling her from the wagon with surprising gentleness. The world spun, and she caught glimpses of several men, all dressed in heavy coats and hats pulled low against the wind. They were cowboys, she realized dimly, probably heading to winter quarters somewhere. "Easy now, madam, we have got you," the first man said. He was carrying her away from the wagon, towards something she could not quite see through the snow. Then suddenly, there was orange light, blessed warmth, and she realized they had built a fire in the lee of a rocky outcrop that provided shelter from the worst of the wind. The cowboy set her down close to the flames, immediately wrapping her in what felt like half a dozen blankets. Another man appeared with a tin cup of something hot, steam rising from it in the frigid air. "Get this in her, Vincent. Warm her from the inside," the second man said. Vincent. So that was the name of the man who had found her. Through her haze of cold and confusion, Margaret tried to focus on his face. He was probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a shadow of beard across his jaw. His eyes were kind, though, surprisingly gentle for a man who clearly lived a hard life on the range. "Madam, I need you to drink this," Vincent said, holding the cup to her lips. "It is just hot coffee with a bit of whiskey. It will help warm you up." She managed to take a sip, the liquid burning down her throat but feeling like heaven after the cold. She coughed, sputtered, but Vincent was patient, tilting the cup again slowly until she had taken several swallows. "That is good, that is real good," he encouraged. "Keep drinking. You are going to be all right." But she was not going to be all right, was she? Thomas was dead. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a wagon, and whatever supplies had not been lost to the storm. Even if she survived this night, what then? She had no family out here, no money to speak of, nowhere to go. The thought must have shown on her face because Vincent's expression softened even more. "What is your name, madam?" "Margaret," she managed, her voice barely more than a rasp. "Margaret Whitmore." "Well, Mrs. Whitmore, my name is Vincent Irving, and these men here are my trail crew. We have been trying to get our herd to winter pasture, but this storm has us pinned down. Lucky thing, too, or we never would have found you." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Are you traveling alone?" The question brought it all back, and Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. She shook her head. "My husband. He is in the wagon. He died trying to catch our horses when they spooked during the storm." Vincent's face grew somber. "I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Whitmore. That is a hard thing indeed." He turned to one of the other men. "Garrett, take a look in that wagon. And do it respectful." The other man nodded and headed toward the wagon. Vincent turned his attention back to Margaret, making sure she was drinking the coffee, checking that the blankets were wrapped tight around her. "We are going to get you warm and get some food in you," he said firmly. "Then we will figure out what comes next. But right now you just focus on not freezing to death. Can you do that for me?" Despite everything, despite the crushing grief and fear, Margaret almost smiled at his matter-of-fact tone. "I will try," she whispered. "That is all any of us can do out here," Vincent said. "Just try and keep trying." The other cowboys had gathered around the fire now, 5 men in all including Vincent. They were a rough-looking bunch, the kind of men Margaret would have crossed the street to avoid back in Pennsylvania. But their eyes were not cruel, and they handled her predicament with a solemn respect that surprised her. The one called Garrett returned from the wagon, his expression grave. "He is there, boss. Looks like his heart gave out. Nothing anyone could have done." He looked at Margaret with sympathy. "I covered him proper, madam. Put him in a place where the scavengers cannot get to him." Margaret nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Thomas deserved better than this, deserved to be buried in a real cemetery with a proper service. But out here in the wilderness, even that small dignity might be beyond reach. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. "When this storm breaks, we will see about a proper burial, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband will be treated with respect. I give you my word on that." "Thank you," she managed. "You are very kind." "Just doing what any decent man would do," Vincent said, but there was a warmth in his voice that suggested he was pleased by her words. "Now, let me get you some food. You need to keep your strength up." Over the next hour, as the storm continued to rage around them, the cowboys worked to keep Margaret alive. They fed her beans and hard bread, gave her more coffee, piled blankets, and even their own coats around her until she finally stopped shivering. Vincent stayed close the entire time, checking on her frequently, making sure she was all right. As the feeling returned to her fingers and toes, bringing with it burning pain, Margaret had time to really look at her rescuer. Vincent Irving was taller than she had first thought, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his life doing hard physical work. His hands were calloused and scarred, but they handled the coffee pot and tin cups with surprising deftness. He moved with quiet confidence, giving orders to his men without raising his voice, and they obeyed without question. Clearly he was someone used to being in charge. "How long have you been trail boss?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. Vincent looked up from the fire he was tending, one eyebrow raised. "About 5 years now. Started working cattle when I was 14, worked my way up. This outfit belongs to a rancher named Samuel Morrison. He runs about 2,000 head down in Nebraska, and every year we drive some of them up to his winter range in the Black Hills." He gestured at the endless white landscape around them. "Though right now I am wondering if that was the smartest decision I ever made." "You saved my life," Margaret said quietly. "So I am grateful you made it." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, something that made her breath catch despite the cold. "I am glad we found you in time, Mrs. Whitmore. This land can be cruel to people who are not prepared for it." "We thought we were prepared," Margaret said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Thomas had a job waiting in Grass Valley. The railroad was hiring, and he had experience working on the lines back east. We sold everything we had to make this trip, to start fresh out here. Her voice cracked. "Now he is dead and I have nothing. No family, no money except what little we had saved, no place to go." She had not meant to say so much, had not meant to reveal the depth of her desperation. But the warmth of the fire and the kindness in Vincent's eyes had loosened something inside her, and now she found herself shaking with sobs that had nothing to do with the cold. Vincent moved closer, his large hand resting awkwardly on her shoulder. "You have had a terrible time of it, Mrs. Whitmore, no one can deny that. But you are alive, and that means you still have a chance. Things might look dark right now, but the sun always comes up eventually, even after the worst storms." "What am I going to do?" Margaret whispered, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I cannot work the railroad like Thomas was going to. I have no skills, no way to support myself out here. I will end up in some saloon or worse, just trying to survive." "No," Vincent said firmly, his voice brooking no argument. "That will not happen. I will not let it happen." Margaret stared at him. "You barely know me. Why would you care what becomes of me?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost hesitant. "My mother was widowed when I was 12. My father died in a mining accident, and she was left with 4 children and no way to feed them. She tried everything, took in washing, sewed, cleaned houses, but it was never enough. Eventually, she had to send my younger siblings to an orphanage because she could not keep us all fed." He looked up, meeting Margaret's eyes. "I swore then that if I ever had the means to help a woman in that situation, I would do it. I will not stand by and watch you end up like my mother, desperate and forced to make impossible choices." The raw emotion in his words left Margaret speechless. Around them, the other cowboys had grown quiet, some pretending not to listen, others openly moved by their boss's story. "I do not know what to say," Margaret finally whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Vincent replied. "Just let me help you. Let us all help you. When this storm passes, we will figure something out." But what could be figured out? Margaret had no illusions about her situation. She was a widow with nothing to her name, stranded in the middle of the Dakota Territory in the dead of winter. Even with the kindness of these cowboys, her prospects were grim. The storm lasted 2 more days. For those 2 days, Margaret huddled by the fire with the cowboys, sharing their food and their shelter. They treated her with unfailing respect, never saying an improper word, never making her feel threatened. Vincent especially seemed to have appointed himself her guardian, always making sure she was warm enough, had enough to eat, was as comfortable as possible in the circumstances. On the second night, after the other men had rolled into their bedrolls to sleep, Vincent sat across the fire from Margaret, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. "You asked me about being trail boss," he said quietly, not looking at her. "But you have not told me about yourself. Where are you from, Mrs. Whitmore? What made you and your husband decide to come west?" Margaret pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I grew up in Pennsylvania in a small town outside of Pittsburgh. My father was a shopkeeper, my mother a seamstress. I had a very ordinary life, went to school, helped in the shop, never thought much about the wider world." She paused, remembering. "Then I met Thomas at a church social. He was 7 years older than me, seemed so worldly and experienced. He had worked on the railroad, traveled all over. When he asked my father permission to court me, I was 18 and thought myself terribly grown up and sophisticated. "How long were you married?" Vincent asked gently. "3 years. We married when I was 19, and for a while everything was good, but Thomas grew restless back east. He said there was more opportunity out here, that we could build a real future. I was not sure about leaving everything I knew, but he was so enthusiastic, so certain." Margaret's voice dropped. "Now I wonder if I should have argued more, should have insisted we stay where we were safe." "You cannot think like that," Vincent said, his dark eyes serious in the firelight. "You made the best decision you could with what you knew at the time. There is no sense in torturing yourself over what might have been." "Maybe not," Margaret said, "but it is hard not to wonder." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl beyond their sheltered spot. Finally, Vincent spoke again. "You are 22 then, if my arithmetic is right." Margaret nodded. "Yes, though I feel 100 years old right now." "You are still young," Vincent said. "You have got your whole life ahead of you, Mrs. Whitmore. This is not the end, no matter how it feels right now." "You sound very certain of that," Margaret said, managing a small smile. "I am certain," Vincent said, and the intensity in his voice made her look up sharply. "Because I am not going to let you fail. I have been thinking about your situation, turning it over in my mind, trying to figure out what the best solution is." "And have you reached any conclusions?" Margaret asked, not daring to hope. Vincent took a deep breath, set down his coffee cup and looked her straight in the eye. "Marry me." Margaret's heart stopped. For a moment she was certain she had misheard him, that the wind had distorted his words. "What?" "Marry me," Vincent repeated, his voice steady despite the outrageousness of what he was proposing. "I know it sounds crazy, we barely know each other and your husband just died, but listen to me before you say no." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "You need protection, a name, a place in society that will keep you safe. I can provide all of that, and I need a wife. I have been alone too long, moving from place to place, no real home. We could help each other." "You cannot be serious," Margaret breathed, even as part of her mind was already racing ahead, considering the possibility. "I am completely serious," Vincent said. "Look, I know this is not romantic. I know you do not love me, and I am not claiming to love you. But we could build a life together, a good life. I make decent money and I have been saving it for years. I could buy us a piece of land, build a house, start a small ranch of my own. You would have security, a home, respect. And I would have a partner, someone to build that life with." Margaret stared at him, her mind reeling. Marriage to a stranger. It was insane, it was impossible. And yet, what other option did she have? He was right about one thing. Without a husband or family, she would be vulnerable in ways that could destroy her. "I need time to think," she said finally. "I understand," Vincent said, "but do not take too long. Once this storm breaks, we will have to make decisions quickly." The storm did break the next morning. Margaret woke to sunlight streaming through the rocks above them. The wind finally died down to nothing. The sudden quiet was almost eerie after days of constant howling. Vincent and his men immediately began preparations for travel. They needed to get the cattle moving again, needed to reach the winter pasture before another storm hit. But first, as Vincent had promised, they saw to Thomas. The frozen ground made digging difficult, but the cowboys took turns chipping away at the earth until they had managed a shallow grave. They wrapped Thomas's body carefully and lowered him into the ground with as much dignity as they could manage. Vincent read from a battered Bible he carried in his saddlebag, his deep voice solemn as he spoke the words of committal. Margaret stood beside the grave, numb with grief and exhaustion, and the impossible decision weighing on her. She had loved Thomas in her way, had been a faithful wife, had believed in their future together. Now that future was gone, buried in this lonely prairie grave, and she had to think about survival instead of mourning. After the burial, Vincent approached her while his men broke camp. "Have you thought about my proposal?" he asked quietly. Margaret nodded slowly. "I have thought about little else. But Vincent, you barely know me. How can you be sure you want to tie yourself to me for life? What if I am a terrible wife? What if we make each other miserable?" "That is a risk anyone takes when they marry," Vincent pointed out. "At least we are going into this with our eyes open, no foolish expectations. We know what we are to each other, a practical arrangement." "Is that really all you want?" Margaret asked, searching his face. "A practical arrangement." Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, something that might have been longing or regret. "I want to do the right thing," he said carefully. "And I want a chance at a different life than the one I have been living. If we can build something good together, even without romance, that would be enough for me." "Would it be enough for you?" Margaret thought about it. She had already had her romantic love story with Thomas, and look where that had ended. Maybe practical was better. Maybe building a life based on mutual need and respect would be stronger than one based on fleeting passion. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will marry you, Vincent Irving." The relief on his face was unmistakable. "You will not regret this, Margaret. I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to be a good husband to you." "And I will try to be a good wife," Margaret said, still somewhat stunned by what she had just agreed to. "Then it is settled," Vincent said. He turned and called to his men. "Garrett, ride ahead to the nearest town and find a preacher. Tell him there is going to be a wedding, and we need him to come perform the ceremony as soon as possible." The next few days passed in a blur. They continued moving north, the cattle trudging through the snow, the cowboys working from dawn to dusk to keep the herd together. Margaret rode in one of the supply wagons, still too weak from her ordeal to manage a horse. But each day she felt a little stronger, a little more alive. Vincent rode beside her wagon whenever his duties allowed, talking to her about his plans for their future. He spoke of a valley he had seen in the Black Hills, with good grass and water, where they could homestead. He talked about building a house, starting with something small but adding on as they could afford it. He described the cattle operation he wanted to run, modest at first but growing over time. Margaret listened, asking questions, slowly beginning to see the shape of the life he was offering her. It was not the life she had imagined for herself, but it was a life nonetheless. A real life, with purpose and possibility. They reached a small settlement called Cedar Creek 4 days after the storm ended. It was hardly more than a trading post and a few scattered buildings, but it had a circuit preacher who agreed to perform the marriage ceremony. Margaret had nothing appropriate to wear. Her good dress had been ruined by the cold and wet during the storm. But the woman who ran the trading post took pity on her and loaned her a simple blue dress that was only slightly too large. Vincent wore his cleanest shirt and had actually trimmed his beard. They stood together in front of the preacher in the cramped back room of the trading post, with Vincent's trail crew as witnesses. "Do you, Vincent Irving, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Vincent said firmly, his eyes on Margaret's face. "And do you, Margaret Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Margaret took a breath. This was it. This was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She looked up at Vincent, this man who was still largely a stranger to her, this man who had saved her life and offered her his name and his protection. His face was serious but not unkind. His eyes held a question, giving her one last chance to back out. She thought of all the alternatives, all the ways her life could go if she said no right now. And then she thought of the life Vincent was offering, the security and the possibility of something better. "I do," she said clearly. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Vincent leaned down carefully, as if afraid he might startle her. His lips touched hers briefly, gently, more a promise than a passion. It was Margaret's first kiss from any man other than Thomas, and it felt strange and foreign and yet not unpleasant. When they pulled apart, the cowboys cheered and clapped. Someone had scrounged up a bottle of decent whiskey, and they all drank to the health and happiness of the new couple. That night, in a tiny room above the trading post that served as the town's only accommodation for travelers, Margaret and Vincent faced each other as husband and wife. "I will sleep on the floor," Vincent said immediately, gesturing to the narrow bed. "You take the bed. I know this is all very sudden, and I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give." Margaret felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your understanding." "We have got all the time in the world," Vincent said. "There is no need to rush anything. We will figure out how to be married to each other one day at a time." And so began their strange new life together. They continued north with the cattle, finally reaching the winter pasture in the Black Hills a week later. Vincent had arrangements to stay in a line cabin on the ranch while overseeing the cattle through the winter. It was rough accommodations, a single room with a wood stove and not much else, but after everything Margaret had been through, it felt like a palace. The winter months passed slowly. Vincent worked long hours checking on the cattle, making sure they had access to the hay that had been stockpiled, watching for signs of sickness or trouble. Margaret kept the cabin clean, cooked meals, and gradually learned the rhythms of ranch life. They were polite to each other, careful, like two people learning a complicated dance. Vincent was unfailingly respectful, never pushing her for more than she was willing to give. At night he slept on a bedroll on the floor, leaving the cabin's single bunk to her. During the day they talked, slowly learning each other's histories and habits. Margaret learned that Vincent's mother had died when he was 16, that his siblings were scattered across the country, that he had not seen any of them in years. She learned that he had once been engaged to a girl in Kansas, but she had married someone else while he was away on a cattle drive. She learned that his favorite meal was steak and potatoes, that he had a talent for reading weather patterns, that he loved the land with a fierce passion that sometimes took her breath away. Vincent learned that Margaret loved to read, but had not owned a book since leaving Pennsylvania. He learned that she had wanted children, but had not conceived during her marriage to Thomas, a fact that had worried her. He learned that she had a quick mind for numbers and could calculate costs and profits faster than he could. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, willing to work hard, not afraid to get her hands dirty. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, something began to shift between them. The careful politeness remained, but beneath it, something warmer was growing. Margaret found herself watching Vincent when he came in from the cold, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the capable way he handled everything from splitting wood to mending tack. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh, the gentleness in his hands when he handled an injured calf. Vincent found himself increasingly drawn to Margaret. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was interesting. She had opinions about things, asked thoughtful questions, challenged him in ways no one had in years. He loved coming back to the cabin at the end of a long day and finding her there, the smell of cooking in the air, her face lighting up when she saw him. He loved the sound of her laugh, still too rare but gradually becoming more common. He loved the way she hummed while she worked, unconscious melodies that made the rough cabin feel like a home. One evening in March, after a particularly hard day dealing with a difficult birth among the cattle, Vincent came back to the cabin exhausted and discouraged. The calf had not survived despite his best efforts, and the mother cow was weak. He felt the weight of failure heavy on his shoulders. Margaret took one look at his face and immediately went to him. "What happened?" he told her, the words coming out flat and tired. When he finished, she put her hand on his arm, the first time she had initiated physical contact with him. "You did everything you could," she said softly. "Sometimes that is not enough, and it is not your fault." "I keep thinking I should have done something different, something more," Vincent said. "You cannot save everything and everyone," Margaret said. "Believe me, I know. I have spent months wondering if there was something I could have done to prevent Thomas's death. But the truth is, some things are beyond our control. All we can do is try our best and keep going." Vincent looked down at her, at the compassion and understanding in her eyes, and something broke open inside him. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close, needing the comfort of her presence. For a moment she stiffened, surprised, but then she relaxed against him, her arms coming up to circle his waist. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other. When Vincent finally pulled back, his hands still on her shoulders, Margaret was looking up at him with something new in her eyes, something that made his heart beat faster. "Margaret," he said softly, "I know we married for practical reasons. I know this started as just an arrangement. But I need you to know that it has become more than that for me. I care about you. I look forward to seeing you every day. You have made this cabin into a home, and I do not think I could go back to the way things were before." "Vincent," Margaret whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "I feel the same way. I did not expect to, but I do. You have been so kind, so patient with me. You have given me space to grieve and heal, never demanding anything I was not ready to give. And somewhere along the way, I started to care about you too. So what do we do now?" Vincent asked, his voice rough with emotion. "We could try being married for real," Margaret said, a small smile playing at her lips. "Not just practically, but in every way, if you want that." "I want that more than anything," Vincent said fervently. Then, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, he lowered his head and kissed her. This kiss was nothing like the brief, formal touch of lips at their wedding. This was deep and passionate, full of months of restrained longing. Margaret responded with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in Vincent's hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent looked at his wife with wonder. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I need you to be sure, Margaret." "I am sure," she said firmly. "No more sleeping on the floor, Vincent Irving. You are my husband in truth now, and I want you in my bed." That night marked a new beginning for them. They came together with a passion that surprised them both, and what had started as an arrangement of convenience transformed into something real and deep. In the days and weeks that followed, they could not keep their hands off each other. Vincent would come in from checking the cattle and sweep Margaret into his arms, kissing her until they were both dizzy. Margaret would slide her arms around his waist while he was trying to read, distracting him until he gave up and turned his attention to her instead. They talked for hours now, lying together in the narrow bunk, planning their future. Vincent was serious about homesteading, and as soon as the spring weather permitted, he planned to file a claim on that valley he had told her about. With Samuel Morrison's blessing, he could leave the trail crew and focus on building their own ranch. "It will be hard work," Vincent warned her. Harder than anything you have done before. Building a house, breaking land, starting a herd from nothing. There will be times when we go without, when we wonder if we are going to make it. We will make it, Margaret said confidently. We will work together and we will build something good. I believe that, Vincent. I believe in us. Her faith in him meant more than he could express. No one had ever believed in him like this, not since his mother. It made him want to be better, to work harder, to give her everything she deserved. Spring came fully in April, and with it came decisions. Vincent spoke to Samuel Morrison, who had ridden up from Nebraska to check on his cattle. Morrison was sorry to lose his best trail boss, but understood Vincent's desire to build something of his own. He even helped Vincent select several good cattle to start his own herd, selling them to him at a fair price that would not wipe out all of Vincent's savings. In May, Vincent and Margaret said goodbye to the men who had been their companions through the winter. Garrett and the others shook Vincent's hand, wished him well, and teased him mercilessly about being a married man now. They were respectful to Margaret, though, tipping their hats and telling her to keep Vincent in line. Then it was just the two of them, heading into the Black Hills with their small herd of cattle, their supplies loaded on a wagon Vincent had purchased. They traveled for 3 days before reaching the valley Vincent had described to her. Margaret's first glimpse of it took her breath away. It was nestled between two ridges, protected from the worst winds, with a clear stream running through it and good grass already greening up. Stands of pine trees provided timber for building and firewood. It was perfect. "Welcome home," Vincent said softly, watching her face. "It is beautiful," Margaret breathed. "I can see it, Vincent. I can see the house there by the stream, the barn over there, the corrals. I can see our whole life here." "Then let us build it," Vincent said. They filed their homestead claim in Grass Valley, the nearest real town, about 15 miles from their valley. The land office official recorded their claim, noting that they would need to build a dwelling and prove up on the land within 5 years to receive the deed. Vincent assured him that would not be a problem. Building the house was backbreaking work. Vincent felled trees and dragged them to the building site with the help of one of their cattle, a patient ox he had trained for such work. Margaret helped wherever she could, stripping branches, thinking mud to fill the gaps between logs, measuring and planning. They worked from dawn to dusk every day, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary. It took them most of the summer to build a house that was barely more than a cabin, a single large room with a sleeping loft above. But it had a good fireplace that Margaret insisted on, a proper floor instead of packed dirt, and real glass windows that Vincent had bought in Grass Valley as a surprise. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their own sweat. The day they moved in, carrying their few possessions across the threshold, Vincent suddenly stopped and turned to Margaret. "I want to do this right," he said. And before she could ask what he meant, he swept her up into his arms, carrying her over the threshold like a proper bride. Margaret laughed and threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly as he carried her into their new home. That night, they christened their new house properly, making love on their own bed in their own home for the first time. Afterward, lying tangled together, Margaret felt a sense of peace she had not known since before Thomas died. She had a home again, a future, a man who loved her. It was not the life she had planned, but it was a good life nonetheless. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked softly, his hand stroking through her hair. "Yes," Margaret said simply. "I am happy, Vincent, truly happy." "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now though they had been hard at first. "I know we did not start this marriage with love, but I love you now. I love you more than I thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Margaret said, turning to kiss him. "I did not think I could love again after Thomas, but what I feel for you is different, deeper somehow, more real. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, Vincent said. Because I feel exactly the same way about you. Summer turned to fall, and they worked to prepare for their first winter in their new home. Vincent built a small barn for the cattle and the ox, put up a chicken coop, and laid in firewood. Margaret planted a late vegetable garden, preserved everything she could from their meager harvest, and spent hours sewing curtains and blankets to make their cabin more comfortable. They made trips to Grass Valley every few weeks for supplies and to sell butter and eggs that Margaret produced from their growing chicken flock. The town was small but growing, with new settlers arriving constantly. Vincent and Margaret began to make friends, to become part of the community. People respected them, respected the hard work they were doing to build their ranch. In October, Margaret realized she had missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, remembering the years with Thomas when no child had come. But as the weeks passed, and she began to feel the familiar symptoms, she allowed herself to believe. She told Vincent one evening as they sat by the fire after supper. He had been carving a new handle for one of his tools, and she had been mending a shirt. The domestic scene was so peaceful, so normal that it seemed the perfect moment. "Vincent, I have something to tell you." He looked up from his carving, immediately alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Margaret said quickly. "In fact, something is very right. Vincent, I am going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, his mouth open, the carving forgotten in his hands. Then a huge grin spread across his face. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. All the signs are there." Vincent jumped up from his chair and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around in a circle despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby. Margaret, we are going to have a baby." His joy was infectious, and Margaret found herself laughing with pure happiness. "Yes, we are. Our child, Vincent. Ours." He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat belly. "Our child," he repeated wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Margaret said with certainty. "I have seen how gentle you are with the animals, how patient and kind. You will be the same with our child." "I want to be better than my own father," Vincent said seriously. "I want to be there for our children, to watch them grow, to teach them and protect them." "Children," Margaret teased. "We have not even had the first one yet, and you are already planning more." "Why not?" Vincent grinned. "If you are willing, I would love a whole house full of children." This valley could echo with their laughter, Margaret. Can you imagine it? And she could. She could see it so clearly. Children running through the grass, helping with the animals, learning to ride, growing up strong and healthy in this beautiful place. It was a good vision, a hopeful one. "Then we had better build some more rooms onto this house," Margaret said practically. "We cannot fit a whole house full of children into a single room." Vincent laughed. "Point taken. I will start on an addition in the spring before the baby comes." He was true to his word. As soon as the weather permitted in early March, Vincent began building 2 additional rooms onto their cabin. He worked tirelessly, determined to have them finished before the baby arrived. Margaret, her belly swelling with their child, helped as much as he would allow, which was less and less as her pregnancy advanced. The additions included a proper bedroom for them and a smaller room that would serve as a nursery. Vincent even built a rocking chair from pine wood he had carefully selected and seasoned. It was rough but functional, and when Margaret sat in it for the first time, tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks. "You made this for me?" she asked, touched beyond words. "For you and our baby," Vincent said, looking pleased and slightly embarrassed by her emotional reaction. I wanted you to have a comfortable place to sit with the little one." In May, when the prairie was green and lush with spring growth, Margaret went into labor. Vincent rode like the wind to Grass Valley to fetch Mrs. Cooper, a midwife who had delivered half the babies in the county. By the time he returned with her, Margaret's pains were coming hard and fast. Vincent wanted to stay with her, but Mrs. Cooper shooed him out of the bedroom. "This is women's work, Mr. Irving. You go pace outside and let us handle this." It was the longest day of Vincent's life. He could hear Margaret crying out with pain, and every sound made him want to break down the door and go to her. But he forced himself to stay outside, to trust that Mrs. Cooper knew what she was doing. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. The thin, wavering cry of a baby. Vincent's heart leaped into his throat. Then Mrs. Cooper opened the door, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Irving, a healthy boy, and your wife is doing just fine." Vincent practically ran into the bedroom. Margaret was propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when he entered, and the love in her eyes made his chest tight. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby in Margaret's arms and felt his entire world shift. The infant was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" Vincent asked, his voice hoarse. Margaret carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Vincent held his son with exquisite care, afraid he might break this precious, fragile thing. The baby opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to look right at Vincent. In that moment, Vincent felt love so intense it was almost painful. He would die for this child. He would do anything, be anything, to keep him safe and happy. "What should we name him?" Margaret asked. Vincent thought about it. "What about Thomas, after your first husband? He brought you west, and in a way that led to us meeting. I would not dishonor his memory." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "That is very generous of you, Vincent. But no, I think this baby should have his own name, not live in anyone's shadow. What about William? William Irving." "It is a strong name." "William," Vincent tried it out. "Will, I like it. William Irving. Welcome to the world, son." Life with a baby was harder than either of them had anticipated. William was a good baby overall, but he still needed constant care and attention. Margaret was exhausted from nursing and sleepless nights, and Vincent tried to help as much as possible while still keeping the ranch running. But despite the exhaustion, they were happier than ever. Their little family felt complete. As William grew from infant to baby to toddler, Margaret and Vincent's love deepened even further. They had weathered so much together. The terrible storm that brought them together, the hard work of building their ranch, the joy and fear of pregnancy and childbirth. They had proven themselves to each other over and over. When William was 2, Margaret became pregnant again. This time it was an easier pregnancy, as if her body knew what to expect. In the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Emma. Unlike William with his dark hair, Emma was blonde like Margaret, with Vincent's dark eyes. She was a sunny, happy baby who rarely cried. Vincent expanded the house again, adding another bedroom and a real sitting room separate from the kitchen. The ranch was prospering too. Their cattle herd had grown, and Vincent had earned a reputation as an honest dealer who raised quality stock. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, with money saved and plans for the future. In 1884, Margaret had another boy whom they named Peter. And in 1886, their last child, a girl named Catherine, completed their family. The house that had started as a simple one-room cabin was now a sprawling ranch house, filled with noise and laughter and life. The years passed in a blur of activity. Vincent taught William and Peter to ride, to rope, to understand cattle. Margaret taught Emma and Catherine to cook and sew, but also to read and do sums, determined that her daughters would have opportunities beyond just marriage. The children grew strong and healthy, running wild through the valley that was their home. Vincent and Margaret grew older too, their faces weathering, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and childbearing. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. They had built their life together from nothing, had created a family and a home that was the envy of their neighbors. On a summer evening in 1895, when William was 16, Emma 13, Peter 11, and Catherine 9, the family gathered on the porch they had added to the house years before. The children were playing a game, their laughter ringing across the valley. Margaret sat in the rocking chair Vincent had made her so many years ago, now worn smooth from use. Vincent stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder, watching their children with contentment. "You remember that day I found you in the storm?" Vincent asked quietly, so only Margaret could hear. "Every detail," Margaret replied, reaching up to cover his hand with hers. "I was certain I was going to die. I had lost all hope." "And now look at us," Vincent said wonderingly. "Look at everything we have built. These children, this ranch, this life. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "It is not what I planned," Margaret admitted. "When Thomas and I left Pennsylvania, this was not the future I imagined. But Vincent, I would not change a single thing. Everything that happened, even the terrible things, led me here to you, and I am so grateful for that." Vincent bent down and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Margaret Irving. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," Margaret said, turning to smile up at him. "You offered me your name when I had nothing, and you gave me everything." As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Vincent and Margaret stood together, surrounded by their children and the life they had built. The frozen trail had left her a widow, stranded and alone. But a cowboy had built her a fire, had offered her his name, and together they had created something beautiful. Years later, when William brought home a girl he wanted to marry, and Emma found a young rancher who made her eyes shine, and Peter and Catherine followed with their own loves, Vincent and Margaret watched with pride. They became grandparents, watching a new generation grow up in the valley. They grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never dimming. On cold winter nights, Vincent would still pull Margaret close and tell her how beautiful she was. She would laugh and call him a fool, but her eyes would shine with love. They held hands when they walked, finished each other's sentences, communicated with looks across crowded rooms. When Vincent was 65 and Margaret 58, he came in from checking the cattle one spring evening and found her in the kitchen, rolling out dough for pie. He swept her into his arms, flour and all, and waltzed her around the room while she laughed in protest. The grandchildren who were visiting watched with delight, clapping along. "What has gotten into you?" Margaret demanded, still laughing. "I just remembered that I love you," Vincent said, grinning, "and I wanted to make sure you knew it." "You old fool," Margaret said fondly, "as if I could ever forget." They lived to see all their children settled, to see grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren born. The ranch they had built from nothing prospered under William's management after Vincent finally retired. The valley echoed with the laughter of multiple generations, just as Vincent had once imagined. On a warm summer day in 1910, Vincent and Margaret sat together on their porch, now both in their 70s, watching their great-grandson, named Vincent after his great-grandfather, chase chickens in the yard. Margaret's hair was completely white now, Vincent's too, and their hands were gnarled with age and work. But they still held hands, still sat close together, still shared the comfortable silence of people who knew each other completely. "We did well, did we not?" Margaret said softly. "We did better than well," Vincent replied. "We built a dynasty, you and I. Look at all of them, Margaret. All of this came from us, from a decision to help someone in need on a frozen trail. Best decision you ever made, offering me your name," Margaret teased gently. "Best decision I ever made was falling in love with you," Vincent corrected. "The name was easy. The love, that is what made all the difference." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that as the sun moved across the sky, surrounded by the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through decades. The frozen trail had brought them together, but their love had carried them through everything that came after. And it would carry them still, through whatever years remained, until they finally rested side by side in the earth they had worked and loved. But that day was far in the future. For now, there was this moment, this perfect summer afternoon, their great-grandson's laughter and the eternal comfort of their joined hands. For now, there was love and life and the profound satisfaction of a life well lived together. For now, there was everything that mattered,